I explore the similarities between how the human brain works and how a computer or an app works, and how you can use what you know from programming principles. So we have this beautiful feedback loop of our thinking guiding our behavior, that's creating how we are perceived in the world, that then provides us feedback. And if we keep on acting in a way that's not bringing us the results that we want, it's time to change the acting.
From the city of Peaky Blinders, Birmingham, England, I would like to introduce you to Paddy Danda.
As the world becomes more automated and the robots take over, it's imperative that we build the right human skills for the future. So pull up a chair, grab a samosa or two, and make yourself very uncomfortable. Hey Dagna, welcome to the show. And I would love to know what superpower you're bringing to this particular episode.
Hey, Patty. So essentially, my superpower is that I help people see. A lot of the time, it's seeing what's the obvious, what's right in front of them. But for some reason, they're just not able to see it before we start talking together.
Nice. And so it's almost this extra hidden superpower that I guess we don't really realize. Is that a true statement?
A lot of the time, that's one of the things that we don't see. Yes, that's very true. A lot of the time, the problems that we're facing, the obstacles that we're trying to jump over are hidden in our blind spot. And we need that third-party feedback to really be able to get perspectives, maybe switch perspectives. And by switching perspectives, see it from a new light, come up with better solutions. Because a lot of the time when coaching clients come to me, they often tell me that they're stuck, that they don't know what to do next, that they're unclear, that there's so many choices and they cannot decide. And so I help them really get crystal clear on what it is that they want and what are the actual opportunities right in front of them that they themselves might not see at that moment.
And I know you've got a book coming out as well on this very topic. Would you like to tell us a little bit about that before we then get to know you?
Yes, absolutely. I love that. So the book title is Brain Refactor. I'm a software engineer turned career coach for engineers. And I like to say that I moved from programming computers to reprogramming human mind. And that's what really the book is about. At the very beginning, I explore the similarities between how the human brain works and how a computer or an app works, and how you can use what you know from programming principles. And you don't have to be a magical wizard. You just need to have some basic understanding of programming concepts to really benefit from reading the book. And I explore how all that you already know is applicable to your own mind and how you can use this to get past the imposter syndrome, get out of burnout, improve your communication and collaboration and self-marketing skills.
Is the perfect topic for this podcast, because I always advocate how, as tech people, we're great at crunching numbers, we're great at the hard skills, but we don't often think too much about those human skills and even self-improvement as well for our own health and for our own well-being. So I think we're on to a winner onto this episode. So I'm excited to know more before that. Dagna, did you always want to be a software engineer? Like, what got you into that field?
Well, when I was a teenager, I really wanted to create the future. That was like my main goal. And I thought, well, what's the better way to create a future than to become a robotics engineer? So I ended up studying robotics engineering, control and robotics engineering. And essentially, what a big part of my classes, because I studied back in Poland, where I'm from, was a set curriculum of programming classes that I could not escape, even though I absolutely, truly hated programming. It was daunting, it was scary, it was hard. I felt like I didn't know what I was doing when I was studying in college. But the reality is that after I graduated from my university with a robotics degree, what happened was I needed a job. And I did get a robotics job. I did work in one company that was selling some smaller robotic toys to schools as an educational kid. So one company that was working on like European Union sponsored project that were actually involved in building robots. And I quickly realized that building robots takes a lot of time. And then once you build them, it turns out that there will be maybe 5 to 10 PhD students working on them somewhere in the lab. And like it was missing the impact that I was looking for, right? Like going from building the future to having an impact on a few people, like that just didn't feel enough. So what I did was found a programming job because that felt that with one app deployment, what I wrote could be in the hands of millions of people. So that felt very appealing. So when I moved into programming, the impact there was really clear. And I had the background and I didn't particularly love it, but I figured, well, I can do it. The impact is there and they pay better. So I made that particular switch. And in my very first job, programming job, my mindset about programming completely switched because someone explained to me what it really was about. Writing clean and maintainable code that ideally doesn't break too often in production. So that's when I fell in love with programming because someone helped me switch my perspective. They helped me see what the programming really is about, that it's not about writing some complicated function, trying to look smart, but not really feeling smart. And so that changed a lot. That changed everything. I fell in love with programming. And around the same time, I also fell in love with my now husband who convinced me to move to United States. And when I moved to United States, what happened was I was very quickly promoted from a junior engineer to a senior engineer in 2 years and a few months. And so I progressed in my career very quickly. But what happened as I was moving up in my career, I did not have those skills. And it was compounded by the fact that I'm an Eastern European. I'm very direct in my communication. So I didn't really come across too well a lot of the time. I would come across as an aggressive communicator or someone who's mean. And maybe I was at times. The cultural differences I didn't really get back then when I initially moved to United States, the impact of the people skills that I just didn't had at the time. And even though I progressed very quickly in my engineering career as a software engineer, I then found myself stuck and I couldn't seemingly move out of the plateau. And nobody was able to tell me why I wasn't getting that promotion to my next career position that I wanted, because it wasn't clear for them either. It was such a new one, right? Now, having that experience, I help many engineers that have come from immigrant backgrounds or are immigrants themselves, just like myself, understand those cultural differences that can have a massive impact on their communication skills. I also help them understand communication skills that they currently have and the ones that they're missing. What are the gaps that they need to fill in? So in 2019, one other thing that happened, I was frustrated because I wasn't getting promoted, but I was working really hard. And I essentially found myself burned out, having had a child too around that time, grappling with postpartum depression. And I realized after one meeting where I burst into tears with my manager in a one-on-one, something that I never thought would have happened because I thought of myself as a professional person that would never lose their cool in a workplace setting, but I did. So that's when I realized I needed some third-party help. I needed someone to tell me what is it that I wasn't seeing that I needed to improve, but I didn't even know. So I reached out to a therapist, a professional who helped me understand how I grew up affected my communication, my cultural setting, and everything that happened in my life, how I could adapt to my new environment, basically. She helped me out, and I realized that just having talk therapy, someone who's knowledgeable about what it is that you're going through, made such a huge difference in my life. And then I was like, an epiphany. This is what I should do, because grappling with burnout, I found myself in a job that has lost its meaning, and I wasn't very entertained by shipping features or fixing bugs anymore, or even writing completely new apps from scratch. It just wasn't it anymore. But having deep conversations with people fueled up my fire. And I was like, yes, this is what I want to do. And that's how I became a coach.
Wow. There are so many synergies and connections. My brain was ticking as you were talking that through, because as we were talking just before we started the show, I was mentioning that I started off as a software engineer myself, and I wasn't very good. Sounds like you were amazing in terms of going from robotics into software engineering. Like, that's a great bridge across. Whereas I was offered a programming job, but I really didn't want to be a programmer, but I thought I should do it just to, I guess, get some money in the bank. And for me, I really struggled with programming at the start because I wasn't a natural software engineer. I had to really work at it, but I started to really enjoy it because it became almost this problem solving, this challenge. There was lots of puzzles that you're trying to figure out. So that was really great. And you get to learn from loads of interesting people. And I think the bit that for me opened my eyes up was I was paired up with a lady who was a salesperson, and she was training to become a business analyst. And she and I were put into a meeting together. And I was a techie guy. I had all the technical knowledge. She had the people skills. And I watched the way she won over this stakeholder. It was almost like a dance. She walked in there and she knew exactly what she was doing. There were little subtle things that she would do. Like, she would say to me, "Why are you sitting opposite to the stakeholder?" Because we always sit like either side of the table. And she was like, "Go sit next to him." I was like, "Okay." Like, "Natalie, why is that?" And she said, "We are all one. We're one team. We're one company. Why shouldn't we be sitting next to each other?" Right. So those little small touches I learned from. And then after every meeting, she would phone up the stakeholder to say, "Hey, how did that meeting go for you? And next time, is there anything we could do differently?" And these were little touches that I would never have thought of. So going back to your point around communication and really appreciating being able to connect, I think is super powerful. I think more software people could do with that sort of help. But I have a question off the back of your background. You mentioned you moved to America and there was a big cultural change and a big cultural shift. I guess for any software engineers or tech people that are currently working, say, in Europe or a different part of the world, could you give us a flavor of how different is it, and what are some of the subtle differences between the American culture for tech people versus other parts of the world?
So one that I really want to point out here that was so subtle I didn't see for a long time was around collaboration, right? I come from a country that's much more, there's like a group effort going into getting things done rather than United States, which is very much more individualistic, right? And there was this one initiative that I had at the company I was working for. I was really working hard to get that promotion. And so what was happening is I came up with this idea. Everybody agreed it's a great idea. And then nothing seemed to be happening for months on end. So what I didn't get at the time was that back at home, back in Poland, if we had agreed, we would have collaborated as a group to make it happen. In the American workplace, they agreed with me, therefore I should have led the effort in that initiative. And I was just waiting on other people to jump on board and help me out, figure this out. And they were just like, "No, we were okay. You should have done the steps to make it happen as an individual," right? And I didn't really grasp it at the time. I only saw it looking in the back mirror in the reflections like, oh, that's what happened. It's the cultural difference here. The expectation that they had was different than one that I had because we grew up in different cultures.
Oh, wow, that's really interesting, because I also had the opportunity to work out in the States for about 8 to 9 months. And we had just acquired this other company and they were predominantly based in the US. So I was given the opportunity to go out there and work with the team and almost help them get inducted into the company, and also, I guess, show them some of the culture as well so that they could fit into the ways of working. And I found it a massive difference because for the first time ever, I had a boss who was based in the US, and oh my God, it was amazing. It felt like someone had taken off the shackles, right? Because up until that point in my career, I'd probably say it was about 7 years, 6 years into my career from being a graduate. And so I'd always had bosses that were quite controlling, quite command and control. And they would be constantly micromanaging me, wanting to know exactly what I've been doing throughout the day. And yet the US culture for me was completely different. And like you say, there was this autonomy and expectation that if you've got a good idea, like go for it. And there was a real support there. And I remember even our director, she would come in daily and just come and chat to us. Whereas in the UK, I don't ever think I ever got to speak to my director. Like they were seen as too important. They were hidden out of sight. And every now and again, they would do an all hands call or something like that. And you felt very privileged that you've got your director on a call. It was a huge difference for me as well.
Yeah, the structure here is much more flat versus back at home. It's much more hierarchical, and you have that ladder, and you cannot really go beyond that. So yeah, totally agree.
And so let's get on to your coaching and the great work you're doing at the moment. So you mentioned about refactoring brains and how we can program the human mind. I'm really curious to know more about that. So could you dive into that for us? And then I'm excited to see where this conversation goes.
Let's start with like super topic that's very common right now, AI.
Okay.
Because AI is modeled on a human brain, right? And how does AI work? Basically, you have this robot that is being trained on a data set to solve a particular problem or a challenge. So once it's been trained on a data set, once it's trained on how to solve a problem, you give it a problem and it solves that problem for you, right? Now, with human minds, it's very similar, except the data set is your lived experience, the way you lived your life, the people that were in it, and the problems that you're going through and how you're solving them are then affected by essentially the data set. So in order to change anything about how you do things, in order to see different outcomes, right, you have to retrain the data set, either by opening yourself up to different experiences or by changing your thinking, right? So a lot of the time, I like to say that our responses are automated. Let's say it's similar to a computer where you have the user-facing user interface that you can see, that you can interact with. There are buttons that you can push and press. But really what's happening in guiding the app or the computer is running behind the screen, behind the scene, in the background, right? And it's the background processes that decide what happens after you press that button, right? Or after you scroll or do whatever user interaction with the interface. So even though we can see some of the user interface level actions that you do, how you interact with other people, it's really the background processes that are running in your mind that we have to understand in order to change that user interface behavior. I hope that makes sense.
So in a way, we're showing the world a certain view of us, and that's the user interface that everyone's seeing. But yet, I think what you're saying is then behind the scenes, behind that user interface, is all of the processing that's going on. And that's the stuff that we've got to somehow change or continuously evolve with new data and new thinking.
Yes. You have to essentially dive into the code base that's sitting in between your ears, right? And what happens when an app has a bug? What does the software engineer do? You go inside the app, you find the lines of the code that are causing the issues, and you refactor them. You change those lines deploy the new app, and then the bug's no more there. So the same thing with our lives. If you see something, like, for example, you're not getting a promotion, that's feedback. There's some buggy behavior that's probably preventing it from happening. And so the question is, how do you dive into that code that's sitting between your ears to find that line or set of lines or set of files or set of memories or set of beliefs when we're talking about the mind that you need to alter in order to get rid of that buggy behavior and get a different outcome?
Nice. I love that metaphor. I think especially software people will get that completely. So that's super cool. So do some of us have more bugs than others?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. Again, it all depends on the data set that you've been trained on, how you lived your life. For some people, it's more smooth sailing. For others, it's a little bit more. And, it all depends really on what it is that you've experienced, but also what it is that you're looking for. Not everybody's looking for the same thing in their lives. And, that's another thing that I help my clients realize, that I help them see. A lot of the time we think we want one thing because we feel this pressure. My mom would be proud if I got that promotion, right? Where in reality, what I want is more flexibility and more time to spend with my family. So I help my client see what they truly want outside of that external noise and how to get the confidence to go after what they want.
So let's put this to the test. So could you give us some ways in which we can start to refactor the way we think? Because is it a simple case of us changing perhaps the language in our heads, or is there other things that we should do to start to change that thinking?
Number one is feedback, right? So for example, when you deploy an app to an app store and end users download it, how do you know there's a buggy behavior, there's a crash or something wrong happening? Well, you either catch it in the testing stage and a tester gives you feedback, hey, this isn't working. Or the end user using your app in the real world will tell you, hey, this isn't working. Like, I can't log in when my Wi-Fi is low or whatever. You need to get feedback. So opening yourself to feedback, to what other people are telling you about what isn't working, is the very first step. And then be open to receiving that feedback instead of fighting it off. That's when we can choose to do something about it and use it in order to refactor the way we think, what we believe in, and that will trickle down to different behaviors, which will cause different outcomes.
Okay, love that. So feedback is key in all of this. And I'm guessing you would actively seek that feedback, or is that done in other ways, i.e., having that emotional intelligence to know that you are perhaps not behaving in the way that you should be?
So one other source of feedback are the feelings that we feel. Whether you feel at ease, at peace, like what you're doing matters, or if you feel frustrated and angry and, annoyed, those feelings are feedback. Your body is trying to tell you something. So if you just open yourself up and listen, you can use that information to make some changes, right? So let's say you got passed over for a promotion. You think that the person that got promotion instead has actually less education, less experience, they're less knowledgeable, and you were the person who deserved that promotion, not them, right? You're frustrated. This is telling you that A, you either aren't seeing something because perhaps they had the skills that you needed but didn't have, and that's why you didn't get promotion. Or perhaps that this particular workplace is not for you. You're not a good fit, and you will always have to work hard in order to get ahead. So maybe it's time to switch workplace. Now, it's really hard to do it all in your own head. So that's why I recommend reaching out to a third party. And it doesn't have to be a therapist. It doesn't have to be a coach. It could be a trusted friend that knows the lay of the land, right? Another engineer you worked with in the previous job, or your previous manager. someone who doesn't work with you, right? Who can give you that kind of honest feedback to do something about the situation that you're in. That's kind of the beginning. And I have much more detailed examples in my upcoming book. So I would love to refer you to my book as well, Brain Refactor.
Oh, absolutely. And we'll mention how we can get hold of that at the end of the episode as well. So if anyone's interested, that will be super awesome. And I'm thinking here, is this to do with perspective? Because when I hear some people talking about the way we treat ourselves in our head, it's probably not the way we would treat other people, because that voice in our head is telling us certain things like, oh, you're not good enough. You can't do this. But then if we shift perspective, then it can unlock a lot of opportunity for us. How important is perspective in all of it?
It's incredibly important, right? And I've seen my clients, after shifting their perspective, literally double their salary as a result of working with me because they were underpaid, or move out of the toxic workplace, even though they didn't feel ready, because they were able to shift that perspective, or leave the imposter syndrome behind because they needed a shift in perspective. So in my coaching package, I work with people for about 4 months. That's the time of the engagement. And in that time, people get incredible results as a matter of fact, as a result of shifting their perspectives. So it's not really grandiose, right? But it can have profound effect. And here's why it makes sense. How we think and what we believe in affect how we act. How we act is essentially how we operate in the other world, in the world around us. So the world around us will provide us feedback that we may be listening to or not listening to. But if we are, we can use that feedback to change something. So we have this beautiful feedback loop of our thinking guiding our behavior. That's creating how we are perceived in the world, that then provides us feedback. And if we keep on acting in a way that's not bringing us the results that we want, it's time to change the acting. But it needs to happen at the thinking level, at what you believe in. Because here's what happens, Patty. At the end of the day, because most of our behaviors are automated, they fall in line with who we believe we are. So for example, let's say if I love pineapple pizza and I want to eat pineapple pizza every dinner, even if I go on a diet, I will, in a result of getting stressed out or having a difficult day, default to what I believe to be true about myself, which is that I'm a pineapple pizza lover and I love to eat pizza for dinner. I'm going to fall back on that behavior. So only when I can reprogram that part of my identity and say, actually, I'm a kale salad person. I love kale. That's when I'm going to default back eating, healthier food rather than choosing the pineapple pizza.
I love the way you use that example, because I don't like pineapple pizza, but hey, I'm not going to edit that out. I'm going to leave it in. So I think the missing link for me, as I'm thinking this through, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this, is if we've got to the point where we've got the feedback, we've determined there's a bug, we need to fix ourselves, we know what needs to happen. I need to change my perspective. I need to reprogram my mind. How do I execute that? So I'm gonna continue with your coding analogy. Like, I've started to design the code, the algorithm, but I haven't actually programmed myself yet, because I don't quite know how to program myself. I don't like pineapple pizza, but maybe I should. So how do I move myself from here to here? Like, is there techniques I can use there?
So if you were trying to retrain an AI bot, you would do it by repetition. You essentially feed it the new either beliefs, new thoughts, new patterns of behavior until it gets it, right? And the same applies to human mind. In order to switch up the neural pathway, the hardware that's installed in our brains, the way it looks like, we have to just repeat certain thoughts, actions, and behaviors until they stick. You could refer to it as habit building. And when it comes to habits, it's not just what you're doing, it's also what you're thinking. That's very important here. That's essentially how you reprogram the mind. And we know now that our brains are very neuroplastic, which means that they can change at any point in our lifetime, even though, the basics of it, it's like 80% of it is being created until 5 years old. Then the next 20-ish%, it's until you're 30, that's getting formed into its like more fundamental phase. But then as you pass the age of 30, your brain still is continually changing. You can have an effect on how it's changing. You can choose different strategies in order to reprogram the things that you don't like. So, we talked a lot about feedback. We talked that without feedback, you cannot really change anything. But another key element that we should mention too is awareness, right? Becoming aware that things aren't working for you, that frustration actually means something. And then reflecting on, I wonder, what kind of lifetime experience could have programmed me to act that particular way? And only after you reflect, you can then change it, because you could, for example, realize, oh, I hated public speaking because when I was a kid, every time that I would get on that stage, my colleagues from the class, my classmates, would make fun of me. And I hated being rejected. I hated feeling that way. So now I hate public speaking. But you also realize that actually giving presentations to maybe non-technical stakeholders is that one step that's missing from you to get that promotion that the other person got that was, less technically educated than you are. And now you choose to decide, well, that's just a skill. It might be scary at first, but I'm going to learn it anyway. I'm going to practice. I'm going to keep doing it. And eventually you find yourself much more at ease with public speaking. It's really the awareness, or how I like to call it, debugging your mind and understanding what's really not working and why, that can have such a profound effect.
It feels like you know me too well, Dagna, because that's the exact situation I was in as a kid. In terms of my public speaking, I was hugely introverted. I would never put up my hand in class. Never mind getting me to stand up in front of people and talk. I remember on my degree, the module I disliked the most was the communication skills module, because the lecturer at the time would make us stand up and just present something at random. And I felt so uncomfortable about that. And I don't know where it stems from. Like you say, there must have been something in my childhood that had caused that. Probably, like you say, someone may be laughing at me at one time or another. And then, like you mentioned, the brain is so plastic. It can evolve. We can build these new neural pathways. I think for the last 10 years is when I've really gone hard at public speaking, as in really pushed myself, made myself do things that I was really uncomfortable with. And now I say to people, I've gone from being a professional introvert to now being addicted to conversation. You cannot leave me anywhere without me speaking to somebody. And I'm an absolute nightmare on holiday, at conferences, wherever you stick me. So I totally relate to everything you've just said there, in that once you have that drive, I think it's that mental drive to say, I'm going to fix this, then you almost have the motivation to push yourself. I think where I'm stuck at the moment, I've been meaning to start going to the gym and working out more, but that's something that I keep putting off. And I'm building up the mental courage and the motivation to go, right, I need to start doing it. And I'm sure if I do it, if I repeat it and start to do it again and again, I'll fall in love with it because I've done it before. That's something I need to get over at the moment.
I love this story. Kind of add a one caveat, what you were talking about being an introvert. I want to say that being an introvert is not an excuse for poor people skills, right? It's just lack of practice. So the more practice you get, the better you're going to become at it. And you still might be an introvert, but you might have a phenomenal set of social skills, of people skills, right? The way I see introversion and extroversion is more about where you recharge and get your from, you know, whether it being around people or away from people. It's not that simple. It's more complicated than that. But talk a little bit about, having a drive to fixing things, which really taps into something that I do with my clients as well, which is understanding what it is that you value at your core, not what you think you should be doing. And, going to the gym might be something that you think you should be doing because everybody's going to the gym now, aren't they? So the way to find motivation is really to tie it with something that you truly value. And that's how you are able to tap into that internal motivation. Like, for example, for me, staying healthy is very important because I want to see my kids grow up. I want to experience having grandkids one day. And I'm very aware that if I don't take care of myself, that might not happen. And this is my motivation for staying healthy.
At the moment, my motivation is my niece is getting married in August in Canada, and
that's a great motivation. Okay.
I need to fit into the suit that I'm going to wear. Not quite as deep as your motivation there, but I certainly have that motivation as well, having children. So yeah, maybe I should switch my motivations around. That might be a stronger pull for me. So yeah, I'll have to work on that one. And Dagna, in terms of people that you've worked with, it'd be great to hear, like, if you can give us some examples of how you've helped individuals move from one state to another without obviously giving any personal or sensitive information. I think bring it to life to know, that this is possible and you've seen these results with your own eyes.
Yes. So I give a lot of examples in my book because the book is actually based on the coaching that I've done in the past couple of years working with clients. Of course, all the names are changed in the book, but the examples are real of what I was able to experience that people are able to accomplish in such a short time frame. So one of the examples that I like to give is I was working with this senior software engineer who has like non-traditional background, right? Being a bootcamp graduate, that kind of cultural upbringing that tells you have to like follow steps and stay in your line and not try to, step outside of where you're supposed to be. And he was working in a mid-sized company that was actually scaling up. And it happened that he was working very closely with the CTO, the chief technology officer of the company, and he didn't realize how big of a leverage he actually had on creating opportunities for himself and the company. So as the company was scaling up, he came to me because he was told, you're going to become a team lead and ramp up on, leadership skills as soon as possible. It happened that he already had a lot of good elements in place. So when I was able to point out the kind of opportunity that he has working so closely with the executives and building his confidence, because he didn't really feel confident having that non-traditional background, we were able to, in 4 months, get him a promotion, not to a team lead position, but to a VP of engineering, which was a skip level promotion for him, right? And that was only that only happened because he was able to change his perspective, to see what was missing, to see how his upbringing affected his confidence, including the non-traditional background. But we were able to notice what are the strengths that are coming from how he grew up, right? And we changed the labels around how he was thinking about himself and how he was talking to himself in his own mind. We refactored those parts, and they had a tremendous effect. I mean, can you imagine that happening in just 4 months?
Having a third party to be able to bounce ideas and also just prompt you to think deeply about some of your motivations, some of the things that you want to fix really, really helps. So yeah, I'm a massive fan of coaching. I think it's a really underrated skill that many organizations still haven't tapped into. Are there specific, I guess, techniques that you use in your coaching that are maybe your favorite techniques to help someone really think deep about themselves?
I like to do that in journaling type exercises. So for every session that I have with my clients, I give them a set of questions, like a homework, if you will. And then based on that homework, we work on our next session doing a very deep dive, right? But in order for a deep dive to happen, they need to become aware and honest about what it is that's currently happening that might be holding them back. And, it's very important to have a safe space in order to do that. I'm not sure if a company, a workplace setting is always the best for coaching, because just like you mentioned at the very, very beginning of this call, it's very important for people to grow not only as professionals, but as people, right? Invest in their personal growth. So investing in coaching with someone who's not close to your company, who doesn't have any side incentives for you to act a certain way, can be much better, in my opinion. But yes, I agree. I myself, when I was transitioning from being an engineer to having my own business, running coaching business, I was working with coaches and it helped tremendously. And they were able to point out some of the things that for me were like mind-blowing things. Like, for example, the way I marketing myself, right? So having that third-party feedback can be invaluable if you're willing to listen and do something about it. Because a lot of the times, I get with people on a strategy call and I'm brutally honest with them. Look, it's like with a gym membership. If you're going to pay, but you're not going to show up, you're not going to see results. You have to put in the work to see any result. The only thing that I can do as a coach is to guide, to point out the things that you're not currently seeing, is to help you see from a different perspective.
So we're fast approaching time, and I do want to ask you one of my favorite questions before we end the show. So if I could give you any superpower to abolish something in the world of work, and we'll do a trial, so it's for 24 hours, what would that be?
I would definitely abolish complaining. I feel like it never leads to anything, and it's just a way for people to vent and get their frustrations out because they haven't found the outlet, or they're not aware that they're currently burned out or dealing with other issues. So definitely complaining gone for 24 hours. Wouldn't the world be a better place?
Wow, that would be interesting, wouldn't it? Yeah, so everyone gets behind your ideas and just gives it a go rather than giving you 20 answers for why we shouldn't be doing this and complaining about it.
Not necessarily. You could disagree with another person. Just do it gracefully. You don't have to complain about it.
I was going to complain now, but I can't think of the word. Anyway, let's move on. So yes, let's do that one. And before we go, it'd be great to hear, first of all, how people can get in touch with you and get hold of your new upcoming book. And also if there's any other resources that you could recommend for people that have perhaps inspired you along this journey.
So in terms of connecting with me, the best place to look into is, there are two places actually. It's my website, themindfuldev.com, where you'll find a lot of resources, including a link for the book. So the link for the book, once it's out, it's going to be themindfuldev.com/book to make it easy and get it from the Amazon listing. Or LinkedIn. I'm active on my LinkedIn profile. I love connecting there with other like-minded professionals and individuals. And in terms of things that inspire me, I gotta say I'm a huge fan of Mel Robbins' podcast. So that would be the one thing that I recommend anyone to start listening to, other than reading my book.
Oh, amazing. I always see Mel Robbins' podcast pop up on my app, but I haven't actually listened to that. That's going to be my podcast for next week, I think. I always listen to podcasts at really weird times. Like on Saturdays, I do the vacuuming in the house, and that's my opportunity to hear at least half an hour of a podcast.
Dishes. That's my time for listening podcasts when I do the dishes.
Awesome. And also the dog. We've got a dog. So when I do the dog walk on my own, I often listen to one then as well, and the school run. So it's like where we're kind of almost on autopilot, and we're doing an activity that doesn't require too much thinking, and the podcast is just then taking up that brain power. So yeah.
You know, Patty, here's one thing I would recommend you do next time, and I'm curious what's going to come up. How about you don't listen to our podcast? Just pay attention to your thoughts, see what stuff pops up. Maybe there will be some useful feedback there.
Okay, I'm going to try that one. Let me see how that one goes for next week. I think I know what will happen with me, though. I just buzz with ideas and my brain just goes all over the place, but I will try. Let's see what happens. Amazing. Thank you. Dagna, it's been a pleasure getting to know you. I feel like the 40 minutes or so, actually 50 minutes or so that we spent today has just flown by. And I've certainly got lots of ideas that I can implement going forward. So thank you so much for joining me today.
The pleasure is mine. Thanks for having me.
It's the end of another episode. Thank you so much for listening. Please do connect with me via LinkedIn and drop me a message and let me know your favorite takeaways from the episode. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Superpower School newsletter so that you can be notified of all future episodes. Simply visit the website www.superpowers.school. Thank you once again.